Hi, I'm Birchie, CEO of Open Solar and on the board of the Global Solar Council. And I've just been crunching the numbers for 2025. So welcome to the YouTube channel, and let's get into some detail. Firstly, the good news. In the last 5 years, solar has grown by 32% on average every year, growing installations to 594 gigawatts with over 2 terawatts of compound growth, cumulative installations. It's huge. What might make more sense to you in these numbers is that we're now this year in 2026 going to supply over 10% of the world's electricity supply this year for the first time ever. So we're becoming meaningful, and that's because we're winning business, because we're the lowest cost energy on the planet, the lowest cost energy humanity has ever had. So another little fun point before we get into some of the downside news. This next month in March, we will actually exceed 3 terawatts of cumulative solar. So that's about a year and a half after we hit 2 terawatts. Enormously successful growth and something we should all be really proud of. However, here's the not so good news. We've crunched the data for the end of 2025 using open solar data on the market from our users and also looking at all the government data around the world. And what it's showing is that for the first time in 24 years, we're going to have a negative growth in installations. Installs will fall. We think just by about 2%. From 594 gigawatts to 582 gigawatts in 2025. And what's more, it looks like because of these same trends that are impacting the market at the end of last year and the beginning of this year in 26, we'll have another fall in the market. We think of around 12%. So something down towards, we think, 514 gigawatts in 2026, possibly as low as 500 gigawatts in some scenarios. So what's going on here? Why is the growth rate slowed down? Well, firstly, we have to remember that even at 550, 600 gigawatts, we're still taking share. So the growth in solar mix will increase, and we're going to create jobs, and we're going to save customers money, and it's all good. However, the slowdown does impact the speed with which we have this energy transition. And the annoying thing is most of these things are really man-made, government policy-driven overlays on this fundamental trend of low-cost energy coming from the sun. So some of the trends that are affecting us right now, firstly, the big driver is China. So actually China is about 50% of the solar market today. They got up to nearly 300 gigawatts of installations about a year ago. But the Chinese government have done a couple of things. They've actually changed domestic policy. So you're going to get paid less in the short term when you install solar. That policy changed in the middle of last year in 25. And what we've looked at in government data that frankly I don't think enough people have seen yet is that the installation rate in China in the second half of the year collapsed. They did over 90 gigawatts of installs in June before the policy changed, and they did a low of 7 gigawatts in August. So it's a huge dramatic decline in the most important market in the world. So that low run rate now is going to affect the 25 number, as I say, being slightly negative, and in 26 it will mean we have this further drop by about 12% globally across all countries. The next change is that Chinese government again have decided to put VAT on panels, which they applied to everything else, but we've kind of had a discount and it's been avoided till now. But that will add 9% to the cost of exported solar panels from China, which are still about 90% of all the world's supply. So that's going to have a big increase on the cost of solar panels, which might end up being 15, 20% to the end consumer by the time it's kind of gone through the supply chain. Another big negative, again from China, I'm afraid, is that the Chinese government have also put constraints on polysilicon supply, which is starting to push up the price of polysilicon, which makes the raw materials more expensive for solar panels. So panel prices are probably going to go up in 2026, and we're already starting to see a bit of that now. The other parts of the market that are changing is more in the demand side. So around the world, when I was traveling through India and Europe and Australia and meeting customers and talking to solar geeks and friends around the world, you've got this theme that it's just hard to plug anything into the grid. So grid constraints, interconnection policies are just not ready to take a ton more solar onto the grid. So that's a big constraint around the world, and that will be quite profound still in 2026. And lastly, I'd say the US market. So US is only 10% of the world market today at about 50 gigawatts. But policies there, as are probably obvious to everyone, are very anti-solar. They're anti-energy. And herein lies one of the turning points that I think you begin to see at the end of 26, where we start to get a bit more positive again. This reduction in constraint, this artificial constraint in how much solar we can install, is actually going to reduce the amount of power supply hitting the grid, because we're at that kind of scale now that we really matter. There's simply no other way of getting a speedy amount of gigawatts into the global grid as fast as solar. There's 4 or 5 year wait times on gas turbines. It takes 10 to 20 years to get a nuclear power plant online. So you can't switch it up. Meanwhile, demand for electricity has finally started to ramp. We're at about 4, maybe heading up to 5% annual growth in electricity demand, having been about flat for the last few years. And that's driven by data centers, which we're all very aware of. But as importantly, even more importantly, it's been driven by AC demand in the global south. It's been driven by the transition to EVs and the electrification of the economy more broadly. So big increases in demand, but a reduction in the supply of new power means prices go up. So in 2026 and into 2027, Open Solar and many people in the world are forecasting a big rise in electricity prices. The only answer to that is more solar on the grid. So we think in 2027, having had then a couple of down years in installations, we go back into growth mode and we see something like 30+% growth in 27, and probably, as far as we can tell, back to that 25-30% compound growth rate that we've always had since the year 2000, in that very consistent period of growth that we've had in solar. So that then takes you to the S-curve. And if we can grow back at that 25-30% growth rate, then we can still have a world powered by sunshine where we have over 50% of the world's energy met by solar in just about 10 years' time. So lastly, what do we need to do to make sure that we can grow that way? So there's enough land, there's enough products. We can deliver that kind of growth physically and as a business with all the talent that we have in the solar sector. The 3 policies, however, that we need to ensure that comes through and works are quite simple. They're all around an open, free market, a level playing field. We're the lowest cost energy now. We just need to be able to access the market and compete. So specifically, the 3 policies that we're advocating for are no tariffs. So don't add to the costs that consumers pay for EVs, batteries, solar panels, because you want domestic manufacturing. We'll write and speak again about why you don't need domestic manufacturing, although it would be good to have more diversity in the global market versus just being reliant on China. But we're seeing India dial up manufacturing, Europe and America, so that's kind of happening. But don't put tariffs on these technologies that are lowering the cost of energy to your consumers. Number 2, we need to reduce the red tape. In many countries around the world, permitting, installation, and interconnection are all just hampered by the amount of bureaucracy that governments are adding to the process and the work that has to be done by solar people to get these projects installed. And it's artificial, it's wasteful, and it's a brake on your economy. So standardize, digitize, make it easy, make it fast. Lastly, number 3, we've called it, myself and Professor Andrew Crossland, who wrote the paper with me, called it the electric protocol. What we mean by this is we need a protocol for the modern grid. We have the internet protocol for the World Wide Web. We need an electric protocol that ensures all the behaviors on the grid are in the interests of the global community. That means having access to the grid so you know what you're allowed to plug in and where, that you're not taxed or charged for plugging into the grid. It means that you're allowed to sell your energy and consume energy based on the time of day pricing, and everyone is treated equally, regardless of the size of the consumer or the prosumer, if you're generating or consuming. And thirdly, within that, we need to be able to have the access to the grid services market. Put simply, this is when, if you own a battery as a customer, you make that battery behave in the way that's in the interest of the community, in the interest of the grid. So what that probably means is peak shaving. So between 5 and 7 in the evening, for example, when demand is high, you discharge and provide power from the grid. You provide voltage control and other services that technology in your battery can supply to make the grid perform better, to avoid the cost of upgrading the grid at the national level. Now, that does 2 things. It makes it cheaper and easier and faster and better to operate the grid, and saves the taxpayer and the global community and the national community billions of dollars or pounds or euros or yen, whatever it is, upgrading their institutional framework of grid delivery. And the second thing is it creates revenue streams for the consumer. So it makes it even more economically viable to put that battery in and to make it behave in the way that's good for the community. So that's what we call the electric protocol. That's the third policy. These are all open market policies. We're just needing that level playing field so we can grow our industry. And if we do that, within a decade, we can have a world powered by sunshine. That is more jobs, lower cost energy, a bigger economy, more nature, less wars. There's literally just nothing you don't love about that world powered by sunshine. So we just got to make it happen. Thank you. Please do make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch more of the videos like this, putting out on everything to do with solar and electrification.